I want to thank everybody and thank our panelists. And I want to ask Jared Bernstein if he'd care to respond to that. But then we're going to entertain any questions that you may have from the audience. We have a microphone that'll be passed around. So we want you to state your name and direct your question to one of the panelists. But first, Dr. Bernstein probably wants to respond.
Just very briefly, I thought Doug framed things well and set them up, set us up for a good Q&A. There are 2 points that Doug made that one I wanted to clarify, one I want to very strenuously disagree with deep respect for my buddy. The first is Doug distinguished and has made a very important distinguishing comment about the difference between means testing benefits, means testing Social Security benefits as a way to make the system actuarially whole as one of the contributors, and changing the benefit formula at the high end of the way we calculate these things so that people who had very high earnings throughout their life would have lower Social Security benefits than they would under the current plan. Those are 2 different approaches, and substantively, and I think in terms of actually their effectiveness, quite different as well. And I very much would oppose means testing. And again, if we're going to go to a benefit, if we're going to get some of our savings from cutting benefits, I thought the second part of that was a much better way to go. There's a lot of reasons for that. There's administrative complexities with the means test. There are bad incentives with the means test regarding older people's marginal tax rates at work. But mostly, the problem is, and it gets back to my point about how benefits, even though they're not all that generous, mean so much to even middle-income seniors. A means test that raised enough revenue to make a difference would have to go way down into the scale of elderly. You'd have to start taking income, Social Security income, away from middle-class beneficiaries, and I don't think you want to do that. So the thing I strongly disagree with, I think Doug said, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think Doug said he wants to get 100% of the revenues to fix Social Security from the benefit side. And if that is your position, then I think that's A, unfair, and B, very much misguided in the spirit of what I was talking about.
Dr. Holtz-Eakin, would you care to respond?
I agree with Jared on the first one. The second one, yeah, that's what I said. I both believe that it's feasible to do it. If you look at lots of different options, it's not hard to put together reforms that meet that test. If you look at the second reason, it's the strategy that we're going to have to face as a country on dealing with an overwhelming deficit problem. So I think there's a big difference between looking at Social Security in isolation and saying, gee, we got to fix Social Security, versus thinking about the political economy of fixing Social Security and many other things, which we will have to fix.
Okay. Bring the mic down here, please.
Oh, okay. If you could say your name, organization, and the question.
Hi, is the mic on? Okay. I'm Bob Weiner. I'm the former chief of staff of the House Aging Committee under the great Claude Pepper. And then I worked in the Clinton White House and have enjoyed doing op-eds now on this subject, and actually have been on a radio show with you, Doug, with Alan Nathan. Jared, always very impressed with your work on TV. But I'm distressed when I come to a panel like this and think it is going to be really objective, and it's as much 2-to-1 as I've ever heard a panel be. A couple of points I want to make. The trust fund, questioning whether it exists, whether it's real money. When my former boss, Claude Pepper, and Tip O'Neill and Reagan had the deal in '83, they knew that they were creating a system that seniors would pay in, and it would go to saving Social Security right through what it is now, which is 2037, and then have to be perhaps tweaked a little bit after that. There was no debate over that. That was the deal that was struck. And to say that there's no trust fund, when you go to the trust fund now on Social Security's website, go to SSA.com or whatever it is, trust fund's there, it's graphed year by year. And there have already been 11 years in the past, starting in 1963, very few people know this, where the trust fund actually was tapped to pay that particular year's deficiency. And so this is not a new thing, that through 2037 there would be some years that the trust fund has to absorb. So I'm very distressed when people say it's not. It's like telling your bank, you can use my money for other things. We don't care. So that argument does not hold. That's seniors' money, and it's solid. The other point that I wanted to make is that this is not a matter of dollars and cents, Doug. This is a matter of what kind of country we are and what our priorities are. And Social Security and Medicare aren't just dollars in, dollars out. They stop poverty, they stop ill health, they stop health welfare, they stop hospitalization, they stop food stamps. So what's the cost to America if you downgrade these programs to what taxpayers will have to pay for the recovery of that half of senior citizens that you say are saved from poverty, the 90% that have a good portion of their income?
May I respond to your
And
question?
then one other
or are you
point that I
gonna-
need to raise for question.
Question.
Private accounts. Boy, would I not want a private account if when Bill Clinton was president, the stock market was the equivalent of 14,000. It's now at 11,000. That's real food off seniors' tables if you have privatization of any kind. And that's why people like Nancy Pelosi and others have said, first, do no harm. So to go that route is really an outrage to seniors, stealing so that you can give the tax breaks to the oil companies and all of that.
Bob, may I respond to your
You're
question?
sick of
please?
hearing it, but that is
Thank
the
you, Bob.
counter argument.
Thank you.
And I'd like to see the panel respond.
Bob, before we go there, Bob, before we go there,
Okay, so those are the
I would
questions.
like to respond to your question. I used to interview Senator Claude Pepper. Out of respect, we called him Senator when he was still in the House of Representatives. I wrote for the Tampa Tribune then, and I broadcasted WGBS radio in Miami, Florida during that period. I love Claude Pepper. He helped so many seniors out of poverty, including my mom, who worked into her 80s. She depended on her Social Security check, quite frankly. We could go on all day about privatization and the stock market going up, down today, up tomorrow. Over a 44-year history of the market, I challenge you to tell me it has not grown during that 44. I'm using 44. That's the life cycle of the average working man and woman starting at 21. Now I would allow. Well,
Yeah.
okay, they'll just pick out a segment then and poo-poo it. And the fact is, I would like to have Douglas Holtz. He can respond, or Jared Bernstein. in
I
that
think
order.
we both probably want to respond. You want to
Yeah.
go first? Thank you. Great points. I wanted to get back to, I disagree with Jim as strongly as you do on his point about somehow that those bonds are meaningless. Essentially, you're saying we're going to default, and we just went through a period of saying we're going to default, and I think that's extremely destructive rhetoric. Listen, on the stock market, I totally agree with your points about privatization again, because the problem with the stock market in private accounts is it introduces a timing dimension into Social Security that doesn't exist when you have a guaranteed benefit. So if you happen to retire in a down market, you're kind of screwed. What's interesting is that Canada has invests part of their trust fund in equities. And the Center on American Progress, which I think has good liberal street cred, is suggesting a plan to help solve Social Security's financial problems by investing 25% of its trust fund in equities. Now, you maintain the guaranteed benefit, just like they do in Canada, but you tap some of the growth in equities. By the way, that would, if you think of the shortfall in terms of the payroll tax gap is about 2.2 right now, that would close about 40% of that gap if you did, according to CAP's calculations.
So, thank you. I mean, a couple of points. I mean, first and foremost, on the trust fund, there's a longstanding dispute about just how much they knew when they passed the 83 reforms, because shortly after they were passed, there were revisions to the forecast that showed that the surpluses and deficits weren't what they thought during the discussion in the Greenspan Commission. And I'll leave that to the historians.
Let somebody else
I'll leave
answer.
that to the historians to fight. And remains a dispute. And second thing is, in terms of a trust fund, I mean, the sad fact is, if you go take a bond out of the trust fund and walk to the Treasury and say, I want to redeem it, the Treasury is going to be able to redeem it in one of three ways. It's going to either give you another bond, that's not going to help you very much, or it's going to have to go borrow some money, or it's going to have to cut spending or raise taxes. So that's four. But, I mean, the bond in and of itself does not carry the value. It's the power of the Treasury and the power of the Congress to alter spending that ultimately.
Scenario is a default. Just want to be clear. You
I
wouldn't
never
call
said
it-
that.
You would, I know you didn't.
I
I'm saying,
didn't.
you would not call it a bust fund.
So,
There's another
so,
panelist that-
well,
I do.
I'll respond for myself. Third, you know, my proposal wasn't privatizing Social Security. It was keeping the same basic defined benefit plank and adding on an additional saving, very different. And we do know something about how these various accounts have performed. They don't have to be all equities. Remember that. You can hold treasuries if you want. We did, in fact, in the United States, in 2001 or 2, I forget which, allow the Railroad Retirement Fund to invest in equities. And managers have, in fact, done that. And if you compare the performance of the Railroad Retirement Fund from 2001 to now, which includes some fairly choppy financial years, let's leave it at that, it far exceeds investments in treasuries, even with what went on in 2009.
I think it's a very
So-
interesting hybrid.
So, you know, I would like to see this debated on the merits, because we have, in fact, retirement problems. And the last is, I wouldn't disagree with you that this is about values, absolutely. And ultimately, budgets are policy, and our policies reflect our values. And I certainly believe that there's a good case to be made on the value of benefits to the poor and the taxes to the rich, and I addressed why I came down where I did. But I think the one thing that has not been discussed enough is that in this country, everyone's quick to say they're unhappy that their taxes went up or their program got cut. But if we don't do some of those things, we're going to ask our children to do one or both in the midst of a damaged economy. And that, to me, is fundamentally unfair, almost immoral. And so, you know, let's not forget those constituents who are yet unborn and very important.